This is a new segment. This is a new segment brought to you by Rogue Frost Pouches.
Ooh,
I'm gonna be a super like edgy tactical guy, and you're gonna walk me off the edge of the cliff. Okay, you're gonna walk me back a little bit. Okay, all right,
okay.
we're gonna play along. We're gonna improv here. Okay,
Little role play. Okay, let's go.
Chris,
Yes.
I want to be the deadliest soldier on the front lines of this battlefield right now. We've got 40,000 people pouring into our country in Philadelphia, and they are looting
Ooh.
every single Foot Locker. I am going to leave my home, and I want you to come with me, and we are going to go take out every looter inside city limits.
Hmm. Well, let me ask you this. If we go into those city limits, who's going to take care of our families, partner?
Our families are fine. My son is
Uh,
here. My son,
yeah,
I
but
have raised him to be as much of a badass as I am, and he knows how to hold the strong point inside the home. Chris, come on, we've got to go take care of these looters. It's our community we're talking about here.
you're right. It is our community. But that being said, how many people have you talked to in Philly? How
I
many
thought you were a
contact?
war fighter, Chris. I thought you dropped bodies. I thought you stood for American values.
I do stand for American values. And you know what? Philly stands for American values, and they have more guns than those 40,000. So I'd like to see how that plays out first. And
So what do you
then
think we should do? You
we'll,
think we should just sit here and watch as our city burns, Chris?
well, let me ask you a question, Jake the Snake. Um, what would the special operations guy do? Would they just go in there, guns ablazing, or would they plan this out?
I've seen
Use
John
all
Wick, Chris. I know what they would do. They would go in and they would bloodlet every individual around every corner, Chris.
Listen, they haven't killed my dog yet, John Wick, so I'm gonna stand by for now, and I'm gonna wait to get as much information as possible,
So
and then
how do
we're
I
gonna
know when
be
it's time to go drop
tacticians.
bodies, Chris? When is it
You'll
time to go
know
drop bodies?
because your community will let you know, and that's the big thing. The community will let you know when it's time. If you
But I'm
work
not
before
tapped in
that,
with my community, Chris. I don't know.
well, then I guess you gotta wait, Jake. Otherwise, you're gonna go down there, and it's gonna be a bad time for you. Because if you're not tapped in down there, when you get down there, they're gonna think you're one of the bad guys
All
because
right,
you
hold on.
haven't made the relationships down there.
If they kill my dog, though, are you gonna come? It's on then, right? That's when it all starts. That's when all hell breaks loose.
If they kill the dog, give me a call, then we'll talk.
What does it really mean to prepare for the worst? My guest today is a very humble guy who would never talk to you about his background, but I have got to so that I can introduce you to our guest and so that you can understand his level of expertise on this subject. Chris is a former U.S. Marine Corps Force Recon Scout sniper. He brings an elite level of military training and real-world experience to the conversation. However, if you thought his expertise just stops there, we're not even close. He's a hazard mitigation planner for a county near Philadelphia, and currently Chris helps oversee an emergency management for a region of over 500,000 residents. His jurisdiction includes all the things we normally see go wrong, right? 2 nuclear plants, high hazard dams, major gas pipelines, extensive rail networks, and diverse urban, suburban, and rural environments that all face major threats, such as floods and winter storms, tornadoes, industrial disasters, all the things that we prepare for. Chris has been in the thick of it. He's responded to massive fires. He's coordinated recovery efforts for families who've lost everything. He's even helped track down fugitives alongside the FBI and the ATF, and has dealt firsthand with the chaos of the Philadelphia riots in 2020, which ultimately forced him to evacuate his own home. Now, beyond his governmental roles, Chris has an extensive background in security and law enforcement training. He's done some government contracting and has also both trained and performed physical security for private individuals and buildings. At one point, he was a security and safety director for a high-profile arena, and his passion for preparedness now extends into volunteering and teaching folks just like you and I. But he's done that at the professional level too. Chris has taught at colleges in California and all throughout the United States. In addition to that, he's worked extensively with FEMA Region 3 and has completed many of their advanced training programs. So, what is he doing here today? He is going to break down what FEMA actually does and why relying on them to save you might be a critical mistake. This is going to be a very powerful conversation packed with real-world survival experience and expertise. We're going to talk about emergency management, insights, and practical advice for anyone who is serious about preparedness. Without further ado, let's welcome Chris to the show.
That's a powerful intro. Let's hope I can do it all justice. I think I can. I think I can provide some genuine feedback and information for people, because there's so much information out there, and the problem is a lot of the really good stuff just isn't getting to the people that it needs to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no one better to bring it to the people than you, Chris. You're just such a kind guy. Normally when we see the quiet professional come out and do content, it's like really salacious and very I don't even know what word to put on it, and it's nothing to them. I think that there's a certain crowd of people that resonates with, and I applaud those people for getting out there and bringing that information to folks. What is so striking about you is that you're so different from all of that, in that you are just a really kind, nice, and humble guy. And until getting ready for this podcast, I didn't even know, like, I don't even think I knew that you were like a scout sniper. Like, I don't even think I knew that, which is usually like something that somebody will put on the top of the letterhead of their introduction. But you and I we always vibed on, like, we just got along, and
Yeah.
I knew you knew what you were talking about based upon how you spoke about it. And and I never really questioned your background or your ability or your authority to speak on these topics, because you spoke with such authority. So then when we were getting ready for the podcast, and I was like, hey, I kind of need some info for an intro, and you sent me over all of that, which I know you probably also glazed over. I was like, dude, this just makes this guy that much cooler in my eyes, because he didn't lead with that. That was like the last thing he told me. And so anyway, I'm glad that our guests are getting that intro on the wrist.
I appreciate it, man. I don't talk about much for that very reason, is because I don't think it's relevant in a lot of ways. Like, in certain things, it's great, but I tried being that guy before. When I first got into the IG realm, I tried being that guy, and it's not me. Like, my heart is in helping people. I don't, I went through some experiences. That's great. It helps in my experience and how I learn and how I move forward. But for me, the way we give back is from a place of capacity and sharing and being understanding, because the other side, when you have to stroke the ego and stuff like that, all that, we're seeing the results of a lot of that coming to fruition now, I think.
Yeah, we can. And if you don't know what we're talking about, you probably will in the future. So, yeah. But anyway, Chris, yeah, it's wonderful to have you on, and you're just a pleasant person to be around, and there's not many
Thank
of
you,
those. And
brother.
that's the best thing about Grid Base, is getting to actually meet folks. And by the time we end up meeting, there's already so many layers of nonsense removed, where you can kind of just be good, friends and partners and all of that, like, off the rip. And certainly that's been the case with you and I over the last year.
100%.
So I'm super happy to bring you on. We've got a lot to talk about today. I've got an entire list of questions, and we'll certainly hit all of those. But before we do, can we talk about it was almost a year ago to the day, when the cell phone outages happened. I think next weekend will be whenever that big giant AT&T outage happened last year.
Hmm.
What was that like for you, and where were you at when that happened? And did it validate something for you, or was it something that you already felt like you were already prepared for? I mean, kind of walk me through, like, leading up into those cellular outages, and then kind of like how your mentality shifted after the fact.
So I think a big thing that I should start off first is, like, my mentality is always from a family or tribe perspective, right? And the reason for that is I was always focused on, like, oh, okay, I'm this Marine guy. If stuff happens, I can just throw all this stuff in my truck, go up into the mountains, take care of business. But once I dealt with some other stuff that you had mentioned in the intro there, I realized that everything has to come from a family basis. And if you're going to do any sort of planning, those plans need to be known throughout the family, right? They need to be really focused, so that if I'm taken out of the picture and I can't make communication, there's a series of steps there that anyone within the family, from a teenager up, should be able to follow without any issue. So I think the AT&T thing, the cellular thing, we weren't very affected by it much up in Pennsylvania. But what it did is allowed me to see what people and how people were reacting to that particular situation and start, going through the game theory and the game planning side of it, thinking about, okay, what can I do now to make sure that my family, we have a plan for when this happens, and we have a pretty good plan. I'm not as tech heavy on the comms as you are, and some of the other guys who have, really done an amazing job with these programs and with this equipment. But I made sure that with my job we would be able to stay in contact if cellular service did go down.
Yeah, well, you brought up something interesting, which is that like, hey, I used to be that, I'm a Marine, that whole thing. I never served, despite my beard. I get a lot of comments on YouTube of people that are like, "You're not in the sandbox anymore, bro. Shave your beard." I'm like, I was never in the sandbox.
It's so great how people think that, like, you grow a big old burly beard, oh, this guy was an operator.
Yeah, yeah, and that's not the reason I have the beard. It's actually that shaving is really terrible, and my wife would not like it if I shaved. I might have to shave soon for an Avon video, which will
I
be
remember we talked about this before.
yeah, yeah. So I might have to shave soon. But anyways, certainly not trying to portray anything that I'm not. I've always had a beard. And but my question to you is, I've known that for people who don't know, I work a day job, and my day job requires me to be around almost exclusively military folks, and so I'm intimately familiar with that community and some of the struggles that they face. And I'm curious. One of the things that I hear from all these guys is like the difficulty in transitioning from out of service into the civilian realm. It seems like you've really taken that in stride, and I'm really curious to hear about what it was, or if you got out and it wasn't really like that for you, or if you had to kind of deprogram. Can you talk a little bit about like your transition from being an elite level operator to being a civilian, and you know and how you managed to do that so gracefully, or if you're still struggling with that, right? Is that something that you're still trying to navigate?
It wasn't gracefully, man. In all honesty, it was a struggle, and I'll be the first to say it. Like, I ended up going through therapy. I ended up, I did the smart thing I did first, which helped me, was I got involved with a couple nonprofits. The first one, I'm gonna give them a little shout out here, is the Recon Sniper Foundation. Amazing guys. Open to any vets out there, but they do competitive shooting and teams. And that got me through that first year of still feeling like I was kind of in this environment and still collaborating with some of my old teammates and some of these guys that I had known about or known before. And then I got, really busy with work and school, and I kind of used that and then using things like alcohol to kind of mask and cover up and push aside, throw yourself, the typical, military dude, throw myself into work and don't think about that other stuff. And it wasn't until, COVID hit and we all got locked down and stuck in our homes, where all of a sudden I had more time to think about stuff than I ever wanted to. And then I realized if I was going to do the right thing for my family, I needed to seek outside help. And I went through an amazing program that's free to veterans called the Cohen Institute. They're all over the country. I did my stuff remotely, so it's not like you have to go into an office or anything like that. And they helped me work through a lot of things that I just didn't have the mental capacity to work through and face myself. And so, there's that old saying that a broken machine can't fix itself. And one thing I think I have now, or at least I feel that I have, is self-awareness. And between that and some other things, we can go down this rabbit hole. I don't know if this time or maybe another time, but we'll call it plant medicine. The therapy and the plant medicine working hand in hand. I kind of carved my own path to figuring out what I wanted to do and what my purpose was, and how to reset my mind to be able to make that transition and deal with some of the stuff that I was dealing with on the internal side.
Yeah, well, the plant medicine thing has been given a lot of credence and cosigns, very strange cosigns. In fact, Governor Rick Perry, who, if you're not
Oof.
familiar with Texas lore, Governor Rick Perry was a very, very staunch anti-drug, hardcore Texas governor. I mean, Texas is hardcore. Governor Rick Perry represented Texas in his hardcore nature. And yeah, I mean, he's responsible for tons and tons of people who are locked up for small amounts of marijuana and other things. But he's actually come out championing ibogaine therapy and some other stuff. And so anyway, I think it's really interesting that you bring up the plant medicine thing, because that's becoming, like, when I saw Rick Perry talking about ibogaine, I was like, whoa, we are in a really different place. I remember, like, when doctors would come out and talk about it, and that was cool. And you were like, oh, okay, cool. Like, we got a doctor co-signing this kind of stuff. But I don't know, something about Rick Perry coming out. I mean, that would be like Winston Churchill coming out and advocating against, like, dropping bombs or something, like it would have been,
Yeah,
it
no,
would have been
and
really weird.
I can tell you, I can almost guarantee you, someone close to him went through, because it's so weird for him to
He
pick
did, and
ibogaine.
he did,
Oh, it
and
was
his wife
him.
did.
Oh, I didn't know he had done it.
Yeah.
Okay, well then
No,
that explains it.
yeah, that's the
That's
only that's isn't that crazy? Yeah, no,
bro.
his wife had experienced some healing through that, and he had gone with her, and they had gone down to an ibogaine therapy session in South America somewhere, and he partook, and it changed his ever loving life,
That's
dude. And he came back, and, like, he's using all of his bandwidth now to champion plant medicines, namely ibogaine, but others. And anyway, yeah, that might be another episode for us.
yeah, we don't want
But
to go. That's a whole slippery slope right
but
there.
what we can say is that plant medicine or otherwise, because I believe that there's ways to gain self-awareness and round your personality out outside of plant medicine. I don't think that that's the only way, but I do think that that's an extreme measure that people can take who have experienced crazy things and require those extreme measures. But in general, being self-aware, and not just being self-aware because how am I trying to say this? Let me think about it for 2 seconds. 1, 2. Um, Integrating yourself within a group of people can be a difficult thing to do. There's a lot of different personalities, and there's a lot of really challenging situations that you have to overcome. And dealing with edgy personalities, or not knowing how to place yourself within those, and not knowing how to be a peacemaker in those environments, and not, you can ultimately contribute to being a part of the problem if you're not self-aware. And I think that that's one of the things with regard to the topic of um, preparedness and all of those kinds of things, is thinking about whether you're in a sniper course with some guys, or whether everything has fallen out and you guys are, like, hunting and foraging together. Whatever it is, there's a community aspect of it that's going to come back around. And when it does, you have to know how to play a part in that community. And certainly we all know somebody who we would not want to be on a team with, and
100%.
and so it's about being someone that can work with other people and not let your ego get in the way, and identify the different personality types and figure out how you place yourself within that. And I think that that's the important part of what you and I are discussing with in the context of self-awareness and all these different things.
Yes.
Certainly it makes you a better father, and it makes you a better coworker and teammate and all these other things. But specifically within the scope of emergency preparedness, you don't want to be somebody who's difficult to work with.
Yeah, the abrasiveness is huge, and that's a big part of, like, going into the whole personality thing in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps does an amazing job of inputting bravado and this sense of pride in the organization that you're a part of, but it also takes away a lot of your personal identity in exchange for that. Like everything, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And to be able to thrive in an environment like that, you have to learn how to fit in. And part of that means that in a lot of cases, your personality, at least in those years, has to die. Or it has to be suppressed in some way. And that's a big part of what what of these natural medicines, what they do is allow you to get back in touch with that stuff. And so I know myself, and I know dozens, if not way more than dozens, of veterans that have definitely benefited from that. But that self-awareness factor, and also just the daily practices of being grateful, meditating, trying to remain positive even in negative situations. Those are all things that hugely contribute to being in that moment and not being a burden on the people around you, but uplifting them, because that has such a key aspect to surviving any situation, whether it's an emergency or life, is your ability to shift your perspective and be able to look at it and start to problem solve to make it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we probably need to do a whole other episode on plant medicines because it's definitely something that's impacted a lot of folks' lives, especially anyone who's gone through any amount of trauma. And you don't have to be a veteran to go through trauma, by the way. There's lots of really horrendous stuff that happens on the civilian side that people have to overcome. And anyway, well, I'm glad that you found that. And I'm curious, was there someone who, and again, I don't want to tear off down this road too much, but this will be the last question on the subject. But um, was there someone that were you resistive to that at first, and someone kind of got in your ear, and you decided to consider it? I mean, what was the did
So,
it find you? I mean, what was that like?
man, I've always, will call myself, I've always been an explorer and not afraid of pushing myself in certain arenas, especially when it comes to my mind and seeing where that can take me. And so I've had experiences before because before I'd even joined the military, I'd gone down to Peru and South America and back through Central and South America. And so I'd had an experience before with certain things, but it wasn't until I got out that I heard about specifically programs focused for veterans and veteran trauma that had been going on for years. And someone told me about one, and I knew in order to reconnect with my family, and I was about to have my daughter, that I needed to do something. And I figured this was probably about the most drastic thing I can do to have almost an instantaneous mindset shift. And sure enough, it did it. It completely changed my trajectory as a human being and my purpose. And I don't want to say it changed it. I want to say it realigned me to my true self. Not to get too hippy dippy, but it allowed me to rediscover those things and the things that motivate me as an individual that then brought me onto this path. And I completely changed my career. I completely changed my focus, and I completely changed how I showed up for my family and the people in the world. And I think that was the greatest gift it kind of gave me at the end of the day, even though it wasn't, at the time it was a rough night. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, I love it because I think there's a lot of medicine that solves a problem in the intermediary, time, and then you maybe have to continue taking or whatever. And in my experiences and in the experiences that I've come across with people who have chosen the plant medicine path, to use a corporate buzzword, it's evergreen, right? So meaning that one experience or a handful of experiences at a certain time can kind of carry you throughout the rest of your life with that awakening and that awareness. And then and then that's it. Whereas like
Yeah.
maybe a antidepressant or something, and this is no shade to anyone who needs to take antidepressants. That's certainly a real thing, and you should be medicating yourself if that's what you and your doctor and yourself have aligned with. But in the instance of those things, people have got to continually take those things and change doses and stuff like that. And I find that to be one of the most interesting elements in my limited research on plant medicines, which is that they're evergreen, right? You go through that experience. It's a tremendous experience, and then you're better for it kind of for some decades after. It's a long-term fix. To a
As
lot of
long
these
as you as a person are ready to make those active changes, I think that is a perfect synopsis of what it can do for you.
things.
It took me a couple months to really tap into the lessons I learned before and I'm still learning lessons. I'm still looking back on that initial experience and discovering things that I was like, oh, I forgot about that. I'm now 7 years later or 6 years later, I realize the gift that was given to me in that moment. And I didn't realize it till this very moment. So there's so
It's
much going on there that
it's not
it's so.
it's kind of like diagnosing your own shot, right? And for people who are like maybe like here's the thing, like when I first went out and was pistol shooting, I was just shooting my pistol, and then I would miss sometimes, and then they would be good sometimes, and that was it. Then somebody came along and taught me the fundamentals, and they said, hey, look, maybe you're anticipating the shot, so you're pulling your weapon down, and that's having an effect on your accuracy, or perhaps your grip is not correct, right? And so maybe that's causing something to go on. And when someone came along and helped me understand the fundamentals of pistol shooting, what it ultimately did was it gave me the ability to diagnose in real time why I wasn't accurate. and allowed me to adjust that so that on my follow-up shot, I was more accurate and more consistent. And I
That's a
think
perfect example.
that's what self-awareness is, right? It's not, it's or plants. I think that's what plant medicines give you and all these sorts of things. It's not that they give you the key to life and like everything's fixed and it's all hunky-dory now. What it does is it comes along and it shows you so that you can course correct much more easily and more rapidly identify where something fell off or what needs to be adjusted to make that follow-up shot a lot more accurate, you know? And so with regard
Absolutely.
to what you're saying on that is like, I don't have it all figured out. I'm still learning and stuff like that. Like, yeah, but you're able to accurately diagnose and accurately pinpoint exactly what it is that caused you that shot to be off the paper, you know? So
Or if you don't go in there with like your mind right, you can have a terrible experience. And that's another thing that people they learn the hard way. If you're not going, you can't go into these things without first, one, setting your intention, and two, actually be in the headspace to do so, or you can seriously mess yourself up. So
a
that's
good
another warning I want to put out there to people out
yeah.
there.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just like anything else, you know, that you should have somebody who's with you who can properly
Yes,
administer these things.
have a
And
guide.
and have a guide who can help you with those things because you know, and what's funny is that like now we have to synthesize a lot of these things. I guess this is just a plant medicine episode now, but we now we
I
have to
was all prepped for all these emergency questions. Like, I got this. I got this. I could talk about this and Irma and Katrina. And
well,
now we're going down this.
we,
But this is great because this is
we'll get
also something that needs to be talked about. So
yeah, we'll get to all that stuff as well, but I appreciate that this is kind of at the forefront of this because like everything that we would talk about after that doesn't really matter if you're not a well-rounded person, you know? So, um,
100%.
yeah, so I mean, it kind of got to this is as important as the rest of the topics, if not the most important of all the rest of the topics. So I hope people aren't fast forwarding through the episode at this point, but
Like, we just
what's
want to talk about emergencies and black swan scenarios. Tell us
well,
what we need to know.
we have an emergency, which is that through the public education system, through you know, MK Ultra mind programming, through cell phones, through television
Oh
sets,
man,
constantly pushing propaganda. We have an emergency here, which is that people and their minds have become calloused. That's a critical emergency. And what I was about to get at
huge.
was the fact that like you mentioned, having a guide, but that used to be integrated within the community. If you go back to, you know, tribal times and even throughout other times, where you can look at the Native Americans. What's interesting is that you can look at civilizations throughout the world, and everybody had this kind of guide or this community aspect where somebody would walk you through that. There's a Joseph Campbell is a really interesting theologist, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
who has studied all different kinds of civilizations. And one of the things that he clocked was that it didn't matter throughout history, throughout time, throughout regions. It didn't matter where you were at. There was always this ceremony that brought a young man out of being someone who required permission to do things and brought him into his own authority and made him a full-fledged member of the tribe. And so that in some cases they would put their hands in fire ant gloves. In other cases they would like wrestle the witch doctor. In other cases they would swim out in the middle of the ocean and spear a fish, you know. But there was always these different things throughout all these different cultures where when the boy became too much for his mother, they would essentially initiate him. And that initiation process actually has a critical effect on mental development for someone to transition from being one who asks permission to one who leads within the community. And without that, now we see what we have currently, which is a whole bunch of 30-year-old boys running around because they were never properly initiated, or when they were initiated, they weren't intentional about it and they didn't really clock that as an initiation. And so now we have to synthesize these things. Now we have to synthesize these experiences because they're not naturally occurring within our communities. And so I think on one hand, you could go through a natural initiation, and on another hand, plant medicine could be that initiation for you. But we miss that in society now. And I know for me, my father died whenever I was 8 years old. I would later come to appreciate that as an initiation. You know, I
Mm.
realized the scales fell off of my eyes about how dreamy the world was whenever dad died, you know. And so moving on past that was an initiation. And that's whenever I became a man. And certainly it was a lot of work to continually round that out, you know. But
I look back on that now and I'm like relatively grateful for that experience, because if you just had a hunky-dory life your whole life, you may be missing something. Or if you had an extremely traumatization-filled childhood, you might also be missing a proper initiation as well. And so, getting that specifically with manhood, I can't speak on womanhood. What Joseph Campbell speaks on is the fact that the initiation for womanhood comes naturally through childbirth
Mm.
and being child rearing, and that women don't require, in most cases, this external um, coming of age, because they have an internal coming of age. And so it's really not something that's for women as much as it is for men, because we don't have this internal thing that changes, that creates a new grown person within us. So we have to be initiated by society, which, if you go and listen to Joseph Campbell, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, is that women are the proctors of life and the creators of life. And so it makes sense then that life naturally creates them, whereas men are the proctors and the creators of civilization. And so then it makes sense that civilization forms them. And so there's a whole deep rabbit hole you can go in on Joseph
Dude.
Campbell, specifically with his book and video series called The Power of Myth. That's really, really important and life-changing. But yeah, anyway, I don't
Dude, no,
having a
that was
guy as you put it.
that was amazing. There's so much there that you really hit on, and we could go down so many rabbit holes with the attacks on masculinity and all these made up terms revolving around that. But the fact is that if we rewind just the clock 70 years, we had clubs, all men's clubs. We go back another 100 years or even less than that. There were sweat lodges, there were bathhouses. There were all these places where young men and older men could congregate and really discuss these things that are prevalent in the environment of men. And it's not to say that, we want to make, how do I say this without coming off as being outside the realm of PC? You know what? Forget it. We're just going to go like this. There's a certain level of manhood of initiation that you spoke upon that we're not providing anymore. And there's also repercussions that aren't being dealt out by communities anymore. And the result of that is we have young men who are existing in communities who are getting away with things that before there was some level of community policing, and also some level of men within that community who were providing rules and boundaries, both in the criminal and non-criminal aspects. But now we see, and especially in places like Philadelphia, where I live near and lived in for quite a while, we see that all these young men have no purpose, but more importantly, they aren't behaving in a manner in which men should. And I think what you said has so much to do with that. And we can go back into history, into the 80s, and talk about the destruction of urban populations. That's for another time. I feel, if we really want to go down that rabbit hole. But there's so much that you said in that just statement overall that really begs to that greater question of where is masculinity going, and why do we have such an epidemic of men missing in society that need to step forward and embrace the responsibility, embrace the duty, embrace manhood for what it is, and actually start contributing back to the society around them and being good people.
The Boy Scouts is one of those institutions, and you were an Eagle Scout. And when we come
Yes,
back
sir.
from this commercial break, we're going to talk about that and how that set you on the path that you're on now. So stick with us. We will be right back.
Since 1885, Avon has been around, and they've been making the world's best gas mask, trusted by nearly every warfighter in nearly every major conflict that the Allied powers have ever faced. But today we know that the threats are not just on the battlefield. Each year we've got thousands of seaborne events happening right here inside the United States at home. Everything from the extreme fires like we saw in California and Maui, all the way up to and including train derailments, industrial accidents, plane crashes. All of these are disasters that release toxic fumes that are strong enough to evacuate neighborhoods and cities. The list is truly endless, and I'd encourage you to start thinking about protecting yourself and your family from those types of threats. Avon masks are built for real-world protection. They're practical, comfortable, and easy to put on when every second counts. Not only that, they've got a wide range of styles and numerous different types of NIOSH certified filters so that you can be assured that you'll be covered against any conceivable threat. However, owning a mask is just the beginning. Knowledge is power, and proper training is key when we start talking about donning and doffing CBRN masks. Thankfully, Avon has you covered there too, with numerous different training guides and data sheets listed on their website so that you can be confident that you've got all the information you need to make the decision on your purchase and post-purchase. We've got to start getting ready for the unthinkable, so use my code GRIDBASE10 for 10% off at shop.avon-protection.com and protect yourself with the best.
All right, so we are back from that. You were an Eagle Scout. Talk to me about
Yes,
that.
sir. I am an Eagle Scout.
You are an Eagle Scout. You know,
Just
it's
like
funny.
I'm a Marine. So.
Right. Out of all the different, I was not a scout, but I would think that if I, had such an illustrious career as you have had afterwards, I would leave that part out because it would seem silly to continue talking about it. But I think it was cool that you left it in, and sometimes I think why is because sometimes you hear people say I am an Eagle Scout or I was an Eagle Scout, and then like that's where their credentials ends, and then they like build their whole personality off of that. So maybe that's like because of the impression that I've had when I've met scouts before.
That's probably true. I've noticed that as well, so that's probably true.
But yeah, so I thought it was cool you left that in. Talk to me about who got you in the scouts, and like was that kind of your first foray into this world, or what was up with the scouts?
I wouldn't say it was my first foray. It was the first real structure that taught me about emergency preparedness. Their whole motto is "Be prepared," right? And so for me, I was lucky. I had a very different experience than how we picture the Boy Scouts now, and by that I mean the Boy Scout troop that I was in a major military base. That military base had the Defense Language Institute that had a lot of people going there, which meant most of them were going to be working either as linguists or in a operational capacity. So when I talk about the Scoutmasters that I had teaching me, we're talking former Green Beret or current Green Berets, current Rangers, SEALs, reconnaissance guys, and then on the other side, the other base that was nearby was the Naval Postgraduate School, which was a very, very prestigious. They call it the West Coast Langley in a lot of ways. So intelligence base, lots of spies there learning their craft. And so we had commanders and, officers from that school who are also involved in the Boy Scouts. And I had this beautiful blend of two different types of personalities. And the one thing, I'll say this, like my father didn't have a ton of like what I would call man skills. Like he couldn't teach me how to fix engines. He didn't know how to like do remodeling or electrician work, stuff like that. But the thing that he did do is he put me into the sports that I was already drawn to, that he knew I would stay active in. So martial arts and wrestling and stuff like that. And then he sought out mentors that he felt could fill in those gaps in skill sets and mentorship that he knew he didn't possess. And so I was so lucky to get the ability to be raised by these guys. And it probably is a lot of why I went into the Marine Corps and did what I did, was because we were that scout troop that, as everyone was, getting around the campfire at the jamboree, singing Kumbaya and stuff, we were dressing up in full BDUs, and we were literally getting sent out on reconnaissance missions where we were low crawling through rivers and sneaking up on riverbanks to observe other Boy Scout troops. And they were giving us we had to fill out I didn't know this at the time, but basic, troops salute reports where, your size, how many people are there, how many tents, what are they doing, this, that, and the other. And eventually we would do things like steel guidons, which are the little flags that have the troops, name on it, or the bugle, and go and we'd hide it, or we'd put it 30 feet above a lake. And so it kind of, it was kind of like the seed that was planted in me to eventually get into the Marine Corps reconnaissance community and Scout Sniper community and everything like that I didn't realize till later on down the road. So I have to give it homage.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I can imagine other people that didn't have that experience being in your same training groups when you hit Force Recon, and you just being like, this is an extension of my childhood. Like I'm super.
Dude, it was. It was. Like people are lucky. They're like, how do we? And I'm like, this is what we did all the time. Like I was 13 and we're doing 8-milers with 40 pounds on our backs. And I'm like, oh, this isn't that bad. And that's the thing that people don't realize about the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts was originally started by Lord Baden-Powell. And the reason he started it is He saw, in World War I, there was the thing that killed more people in World War I than bombs and bullets was disease. The conditions in the trenches, the people, because 85% of our population is based in urban areas, so they don't have what we call field skills. They've never really spent time in extreme conditions in the wilderness or in conditions like World War I, where we had trench warfare. And so Lord Baden-Powell saw the conditions in trench warfare. He saw people dying from dysentery because they didn't know how to keep themselves clean. They didn't know how to take care of themselves in that type of environment. And that's why the Boy Scouts was originally created. Now, the monstrosity of what has happened to it, I won't speak on, because frankly, I don't know, unless I knew the people who are running a particular program. I don't think I would recommend it anymore. But if you just go and pick up a basic Boy Scout manual, and I would recommend getting one from like 30, 40 years ago, and you can learn so much about emergency preparedness just from that manual alone. That would set you up in a multitude of ways.
Yeah, well, I was not a scout. I was friends with scouts, and
They were nerds, right? They were typically nerds.
well, I was. I'm trying to. There's one person in particular, Raven. He ended up going and was a officer in the Marine Corps, and he had a
Okay.
pilot spot, and got injured in a ruck that ultimately yanked him from his pilot spot. So they threw him into being a logistician, and so he did that and then got out.
Oh man.
Yeah, he's still bummed about that, and he's actually good for him though. He's still in pilot school. He's working on becoming a commercial pilot, and
That's what I'm talking about.
but I think one thing I thought you brought up that was interesting, and Forrest from Redacted talks about this a lot, is there's a difference in being a good man and being good at being a man, and
That's a quote right there.
yeah, kind of what that's Forrest, and Forrest may have pulled that from somewhere else too, but I heard that from Forrest, and it sounds like your father was a good man. And when we talk about, the value that one versus the other like one has, it seems like it would be better to be a good man than being good at being a man, because there's lots of people who are really good at being a man but are not a good man, and those traits end up falling short. Really wise of your father to stack you around those different individuals, and fill in the gaps where he cannot. As a father, that would be a hard thing for me to do for my son. Like, I would want everything to come from me.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's one of the things that I talk about. So, because like every man, every person, we all have our flaws and our faults, and I'm no exception to that rule. He's no exception to that rule. But I will say that the fact that whether he consciously did it or not, once he realized that there are other men that I was drawn to in terms of being able to teach me the effective life skills to make me a better person, and he kind of let them take it from there. I can't thank him enough for having that foresight. It
Yeah.
really changed my trajectory in so many ways.
Yeah. So we can skip your professional career, because I imagine that's
Perfect.
probably like a 6-part series where we go into all the different things you're involved in.
We don't need to talk about it. It's not important, to be honest. It's not.
Yeah. Well, it's only important so that credibility matters, right? And I think you've established your credibility, and so moving now more into the state of the world today, and your involvement with all of that. When did you decide to pick up on the emergency expert? Like, I know that you said you went through some stuff during COVID, and your house in Philadelphia. You had to leave your house in Philadelphia. I mean, was that a big turning point for you? Can you talk to me a little bit about that, the riots and everything that led up to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was still in that same mentality, right? Of, I'm the tough recon sniper Marine, and I'll take any comers, and I'll be on the rooftop with my rifle ready. It's like, no. And when a really good buddy of mine who has a lot more life experience than I do, believe it or not, I don't think he'll mind me talking about him. My buddy Adam, he was working a security detail. He was kind of like the go-to guy for a CEO who ran logistics down in Philadelphia. And at day 5 of the riots, he hit me up. And most people don't realize that in Philadelphia, we had close to 3 weeks of constant violence and raiding, where people were going in and breaking into Best Buys and Foot Lockers, burning places down. It was anarchy in the city. And I got to witness that firsthand, driving around and helping him out with some other aspects of his job. But you quickly realize the one-man army does not work. We all need sleep. We all need rest. My wife was 5 months pregnant at the time with my daughter. We had an old dog. There were so many factors there that I had to take a step back and look at the situation. When my buddy gave me the option, there was two things that I had. I had go, no go criteria. One of the go criteria is where if this happens, we are getting out of the city, was the mention of lockdown, because I know from history that once lockdowns occur, you're stuck inside the pressure cooker, and it doesn't matter who you are. If you get got, you're going to get got, because there's no way of just getting out with how, they close off the highways and stuff like that. And so I'm a big proponent in trusting your gut. And when I heard that, and then within that same day, my buddy goes, "Hey, come over." My client, who's now a good friend of mine and his, wants you, says that you can come over, help me run security. They had a 7-bedroom house up in the northeast side of the Philadelphia suburbia area, which was very nice. Lots of families in the neighborhood that all knew each other. He said, "Come over here. We'll run a security until it's safe. You, the wife, the dog will have your own room. Bring whatever you need to bring, and we'll sit tight until all this blows over, and we'll have the numbers." And so I knew that the way I was doing it and the stress that I was under, just because I had experienced stress like that before with my military background, that I knew feeling that stress, I was like, I can only maintain this level for so long before it's going to work against me. And so I needed to have that community, and he provided me with an option that I knew was the best option I was going to get at that time. And so we took it, but it changed my perspective on how I approach preparedness, because I wasn't prepared. Even with all the stuff I had, all the ammunition, all the beans, bullets, and band-aids, as we like to say, even with all the stuff, yeah. But if something would have happened at my home, I was not prepared. And that's the thing that a lot of people need to realize is community and tribe. You can have everything in the world, but if you don't have community and tribe to turn to when things get really bad, that's when things start going wrong for families and individuals.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about how to assess and acquire family and tribe when we get back from the short commercial break. So
Perfect.
Supply chain issues, factory shutdowns, extreme weather, extended travel. There are countless ways that your access to medication can be disrupted. But with Jace Medical, you don't have to take that risk. Jace Medical empowers you with a curated pharmaceutical case designed just for you by a physician. It's got everything from antibiotics to medications for diabetes, heart health, cholesterol, blood pressure, mental health, family planning, and more. You'll have what you need when you need it with Jace Case. Even if you've got specific pharmaceutical needs, Jace will work with you to build a custom case that fits your lifestyle, and every case comes with a detailed guide so that you can confidently manage your medications even when you're away from your doctor. Having life-saving medications on hand should never be an afterthought. So get prepared today and use code GRIDBASE10 for 10% off at jacemedical.com. Again, that's GRIDBASE10 for 10% off at jacemedical.com.
So you happen to be in a position where, you had this tribe. Oh, how does somebody go and establish something like that? I mean, we're in an era today where we are more divided. We are less connected. Well, we're simultaneously more connected and less connected than we've ever been in history. Where does someone start to develop that? I mean, I know my answers, but I'm curious on what yours would be. Where do people go to find that?
So this is one of those things that I don't see talked about nearly enough, especially in the prepping community. And it really comes down to, you have to put yourself out there. One, that's the big thing. You cannot operate within your own silos and echo chambers and expect that you're just going to magically meet, your tribe and everything like that. So you have to put out the type of person you are, authentically who you are, out into the world. Otherwise, you're going to attract people back that don't align with who you are as an individual, right? And so we see this a lot where guys kind of put on this persona, and then they attract people that may not be who they want to attract to that persona. The second part is you have to be someone who has developed themselves that then provides value to other people. This doesn't mean you have to be a shooter. And in a lot of cases, shooters are a dime a dozen in terms of your operators or whatever that may be. But having useful skills, being able to not only have hard skills like being a mechanic electrician, plumber, construction, working with anything that may be beneficial to people, but also soft skills, just being able to communicate effectively, being able to understand that, like planting a tree, you're not going to get apples the next year. In fact, you may not get apples for 5 years, but on that 6 years, when you get a tree full of apples, it's going to be worth it. And so, I am one of those people that I will put myself out there. I will help people out without asking anything in return. And I do this consistently because I feel that, I truly believe in karma. And I feel that like by putting myself out there, people are going to realize that I'm not trying to take advantage of them or look for some sort of level of exchange. And if they do happen to, reciprocate or, want to talk to me, want to be interested, want to strike up a conversation, that's when, you start building those relationships. And I've always just been huge on the networking side, whether it's on the digital aspect now, which I didn't do before, but now, the past 2 years, I've really opened up to connecting with people online. But in everyday life, I'm always willing to strike up with a conversation with someone that seems to be in tune with what I'm talking about and the type of person I am. And I think that's a huge, those soft skills are so big for that.
Yeah, and it's been my unfortunate experience, which I'm thankfully I'm from where I live, so like all of my family is here, and my quote unquote tribe is here. Um, but there's definitely different groups for different things, and in my experience, and kind of branching out to people that were not family, I found that a lot of these people were like weirdo extremists and super 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 strange birds. I mean, like out of the norm, and so I've been kind of disenchanted, and this is going to seem like kind of a well, I don't know. I'll just say it. It'll seem how it seems. But after I did the Dirty Civilian video, I had a lot of people reaching out that wanted me to like come be a part of their tribe. They were like, "Hey, come shoot with us. Come do this." People in the area, and people that I didn't know, people that would email me and hit me up and all this stuff. And I turned down every one of them. It wasn't because of any other reason than my experience had been that like everyone was focused on being a shooter. That was really
That's it.
weird to me, and I wanted people that I could like go out to dinner with my wife with, people that I could trust my children with, and there wasn't really anyone that, you know, I mean, I've got my family here. It's gonna be hard to beat that, you know. I've lived in other states and I've had to adapt and find, my family in other areas when I have lived out of state. Um, I've always found that to be an easy enough thing to do. But yeah, when you start talking about like with the focus of preparedness and all that, you end up meeting a lot of strange birds and bad actors. And I mean, people would say things like, "Oh, well, if it all goes to hell, I'm just gonna go like start raiding houses." And it's like,
I
whoa,
hate that, man. I
that's
hate
not
that so much.
that's not where I'm at, and I don't think that's cool. So just I'm glad I'm in this group so I can tell you don't come to my house, and that's it. It's just such a strange thing that people say it with pride. People say it with gusto.
I hate it.
I'm
I
like,
hate it so much because the mentality that's already been built around it. You know what I mean? Like that's the problem is that we have so many guys and it comes back to the persona, right? I gotta be the macho, I gotta be the alpha, it's like, no, you don't. You don't have to be those things. And in fact, I would often say that those work against you. Yeah, is there a time where I can step up and take command of a room or whatever? Yeah, I do it all the time if I have to. But I want to be the guy that people are able to come and talk to if something's going on. And that way we can actually solve a problem together
yeah,
and really work through the problem in a way that's constructive because the guys who are just the raiders, like they don't want to take orders from anybody. I would much rather take a guy who is a good father, a good human being, maybe an electrician or maybe a nurse or something that has some genuine, really baseline skills that can be used in an emergency situation. And I can teach him all the other stuff. I've been instructing, firearms for 20 plus years. It's not going to be hard for me to take an electrician or a doctor or whoever, but I can't teach him to be a good person.
right.
That's something that's pretty inherent and you can kind of pick up on it very quickly. And I also think that there's so much bravado out there that people think that like they have to be that guy in order to attract other people. And as we're seeing right now in a lot of this sphere out here, a lot of that goes back to what you said about the masculinity and the coming of man. Is a lot of people get stuck in this state of needing to be a superhero in some aspects rather than just being a good man and someone who is willing to learn and grow and develop as you get older. A lot of people, I can't remember if it was Zig Ziglar or one of these guys who said that, a lot of people end up stopping developing in their early 20s. They die when they're 20s, but they don't actually get buried till they're 80. And I think it's true, especially when we look around at a lot of the young men who just they're wanting purpose, but they can't get past a few of these locked doors that because they're unwilling to let go of certain aspects of themselves.
Well, I think it has a lot to do, which again, another podcast for us to talk about the slashing of emergency. I'm sorry, the slashing of masculinity and manhood. But without a proper guide and without proper placement of those individuals in your life,
mentors,
then you have no reference point for what that looks like. So your default reference point is like Rambo and people that you see on TV and whatever. And so I think that's where a lot of that bravado comes from. Just like when we think about a natural disaster or something, we think about like apocalyptic scenarios, and a lot of time it's like something in the middle, but it's because that's what we can see, it's what's tangible, and so that's what we prepare for. And I was having this conversation with I think it was with Forrest probably, about how it's a good and a bad thing, because like in the United States, when we go and train and shoot and prepare, our level that we look to is the most elite fighting force in the world. So
right?
even if everybody sucks and is only able to achieve half of that, it's still better than like 80% of the world's fighting force. Because if you look at like all these smaller countries all throughout the world that don't have the level of military training and don't have access to the resources that we have here in the United States, like it's laughable to watch like as an example, India. Like it's laughable to watch India like perform military operations. Like it seems like a Saturday Night Live sketch. So even for the mid-tier American person, because their standard is set so high, and that's our only reference point, we're still better than the entire nation's army of India. It's a good and a bad
or
thing.
pick a country, right? Like it's hilarious that like if you're a gun owner that practices, let's say once a month, you're shooting more bullets in a year than a guy who probably spent 10 years in like the Latvian army.
Yeah, and so it's a double-edged sword, right? We get people who, they project this bravado and whatever, and it ends up, kind of shooting themselves in the foot with regard to personal development. But even our behind every blade of grass in the United States is a man with a gun or whatever. Even the fighting forces
it's not wrong.
is like pretty elite, even if subpar to
as a civilian component, right? We have firearms are such an inherent part of our culture, and if you listen to the media and stuff like that, they're going to try to play it off like, oh well, this, that, and the other. Like firearms aren't that big of a deal. It's like they are, and I think that if more countries, at least the citizens of these countries, could rewind the clock and really look about when their firearms got taken away and how soon after some of these major key rights got taken away, there's definitely a correlation there. And, as commonly said, the First Amendment is often protected by the Second Amendment, and there's a reason that's 1 and 2, and followed by the rest. And so, I think personally, like everyone, you should be prepared to be able to defend yourself. But if that's all you can do, you're missing a huge portion of the preparedness pie. And there's nothing anyone will tell me otherwise, because I see it all the time when I look at these disasters and just looking at recent disasters.
Did you see JD Vance in Munich at that security conference yesterday and the speech he gave?
No, I didn't.
Europe, dude. I kind of want to watch it. But
I'll check it out.
I'll let you go watch it. Yeah, it was, dude. He put them all on blast. He was basically like, hey, if He said, I've heard a lot of people talking about like, what we're going to do in the fight, but I haven't heard a lot of people talking about what we're fighting for. And he's like,
Oof.
if we're not fighting for the ability for the people inside of our country to speak freely and live freely, then I think we've completely missed the point. It was really, it was the most profound speech I've heard in any recent memory. Like, I was like, wow, it was so good. But yeah, anyway, there's all kinds of fighting you can do and all kinds of cool guy stuff you can be, but what are you fighting for? And
And
what are your
it's the
convictions?
same. It's the same thing when guys come to me. They're like, "Oh, I want you to teach me long range shooting." I'm like, "Listen, partner. Like, I haven't done that job in 8+ years. I'm like, I could teach you, but like, let me tell you what long range shooting. It's mastery of the basics. And then there's some wind wizardry and there's an art and a science for all that. Making sure you have all the proper calculations if you're not using things like your kestrels and your ballistic computer, like all that's great. But like for me, like there's plenty of guys way better out there to teach that now because they've kept up to date with it.
Yeah.
But that's such a small portion when we have so many things we can focus on just in getting ourselves and our families better prepared. Because you're not going to be shooting at a hurricane or a tornado or at a fire, even though they say fight fire with fire, it's not going to happen, right? Don't take that literally. So, but the ability to have a plan to prepare for those things is far more important in my mind than it is to be able to do one man CQB, which is just ridiculous in and of itself. Like the idea that you're going to leave a strong point in your home to go and seek and destroy, a bunch of gangbangers or, illegal immigrants or whoever is on your mystery list of bad guys who are going to kick in your door it's fantasy. It's pure fantasy. And like, we all like to have it and we all have our little plans in our heads. But at the end of the day, if you're not sitting there with your family protecting them and you're trying to actively go out and seek these guys out, you're setting yourself up for failure. And anyone who's done room clearing knows that.
This is a new segment. This is a new segment brought to you by Rogue Frost Pouches. I'm gonna be a super like edgy tactical guy, and you're gonna walk me off the edge of the cliff. Okay, you're gonna walk me back a little bit. Okay. All right, we're gonna play along. We're gonna improv here. Okay.
We'll role play. Okay, let's go.
Chris,
yes,
I want to be the deadliest soldier on the front lines of this battlefield right now. We've got 40,000 people pouring into our country in Philadelphia, and they are looting every single Foot Locker. I am going to leave my home, and I want you to come with me, and we are going to go take out every looter inside city limits.
Well, let me ask you this. If we go into those city limits, who's going to take care of our families, partner?
Our families are fine. My son is here. My son,
but
I have raised him to be as much of a badass as I am, and he knows how to hold the strong point inside the home. Chris, come on. We've got to go take care of these looters. It's our community we're talking about here.
You're right. It is our community. But that being said, how many people have you talked to in Philly?
I thought you were a war fighter, Chris. I thought you dropped bodies. I thought you stood for American values.
I do stand for American values. And you know what? Philly stands for American values, and they have more guns than those 40,000. So I'd like to see how that plays out first. And
so
then
what do you think we should do? You think we should just sit here and watch as our city burns, Chris?
Well, let me ask you a question, Jake the Snake. What would the special operations guy do? Would they just go in there guns a-blazing, or would they plan this out?
I've seen John Wick, Chris. I know what they would do. They would go in and they would bloodlet every individual around every corner, Chris.
Listen, they haven't killed my dog yet, John Wick. So I'm gonna stand by for now, and I'm gonna wait to get as much information as possible.
So how do I know when it's time to go drop bodies, Chris? When is it time to go drop bodies?
Because your community will let you know. And that's the big thing. The community will let you know when it's time. If you were
I'm not tapped in with my community, Chris. I don't know.
Well, then I guess you got to wait, Jake. Otherwise, you're going to go down there and it's going to be a bad time for you. Because if you're not tapped in down there, when you get down there, they're going to think you're one of the bad guys because
Alright,
you
hold on,
haven't made the relationships down there.
if they kill my dog though, are you gonna come? It's on then, right? That's when it all starts. That's when all hell breaks loose.
If they kill the dog, give me a call and we'll talk.
Yeah, that's what I imagine. Like 80% of the prepper community.
Dude, I've been just like you. I've been recruited for a lot of these groups, right? And you jump into these Telegram chats. I'll tell you what, man. There's about 30 minutes of me in there, and I'm just like, guys, I don't think this is for me. Like, no offense, you guys do your thing. No hate. I wish you all the best. But you start seeing some white power stuff getting thrown up in those things, and I'm just like, listen, guys, my mom's Pacific Islander and Japanese. I don't think I could even be a part of the club. Like, I'll be honest.
Well, then they call
Like,
you a Fed. Then they call you a Fed and kick you out.
oh, yeah.
Fed.
Whatever. Good. I mean,
Um,
as long as that keeps me out of there and they don't mess with me, good. They can call me that all day.
Yeah.
Go for it.
All right, enough fun. Moving on now. So we know where you've come from. We know what radicalized you with regard to the pandemic and seeing how that personally affected your preps, so to speak.
Yep.
And so you had this idea. Then you were like, let's go ahead and teach people some of these things. I mean, kind of, because I'm guessing you probably weren't a big social media guy before that.
Nope.
What was that? What prompted that transition? Was there like something in particular, or it was just this innate desire to like teach and help other people and give them these soft skills that you felt like they were lacking and kind of fill this gap that you felt like was missing in the community?
Yes, but I think if we really go down to the core of it is I wanted to reconnect to people because we were so isolated, right? I couldn't go out and meet with my guys. I couldn't go to certain places and sit down and do the networking thing. I just left school, thank God, and graduated right when the pandemic started, like 2 months before I had my graduation. And so it was kind of therapeutic just to be able to start to talk about this stuff. And, not that I'm a prophet or anything like that. But I saw the writing on the wall with the pandemic. I saw that, people were going to be affected by this in such a mass scale between the supply chain issues, between not knowing how to understand contagious diseases, but then just seeing so many people out there who couldn't do stuff for themselves. They couldn't cook at home. They weren't growing their own food. They didn't know how to cut down a tree with a chainsaw. Like all these little things, I'm like, I can fill in this gap. No one wants to talk about this stuff. They all want to talk about, guns and shooting and all this cool opera stuff. I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. I think it's cool, but I don't think it's so cool that I want to make it my persona. But what I do like talking about is like being a better person, being a capable human, right? What are some skill sets that we can learn to make us better, more capable human? That's where it all started. I was like, hey, this is how I do it. If you guys want to be better prepared because it's helped me, hopefully this resonates with you. If it doesn't and you have a better way of doing it, let me know. I would love to learn. And that's kind of the attitude I've taken with everything, man, is I'm always trying to learn and grow in my capacity to be better for not just myself, but for the people around me.
What do you think is the biggest threat that you see facing folks now?
I think if we're talking on the nose that people aren't prepared for, it's infrastructure collapse. I think without a doubt, when we could talk about anything outside of that, and really ultimately it comes down to that. When we start seeing the critical care facilities, the infrastructure, and the community lifelines start to crumble around us, then we then have reached a point where people will not be able to take care of themselves because they no longer can operate independently from those systems. Yeah.
So talking about operating independently from those systems, I mean, I know you've worked adjacently with FEMA on preparedness stuff and preparing for worst case scenarios and all of that. What is the first thing that people get wrong when they start talking about disasters?
The first thing they get wrong is they don't understand how the government works and the role that the government has in preparation. I cannot tell you how many times I see people go, well, FEMA didn't show up and they're not bringing me stuff. And I'm like, that's not FEMA's job. And that's what people don't understand about FEMA is that they are a management agency. They are bringing administrative personnel, aka managers, down to where the disaster occurs, and those individuals are then managing from the systems that they've created, the NIMS and the incident command systems. They're taking those things and they're using that to help build structure in an unstructured environment. And people need to realize that your community emergency management, so like kind of the realm that I'm in, right? You have your individual municipality and townships, and there you have an emergency management coordinator. And then it comes up to the county level, which is where I'm at. And I think this is where we can have the most impact and work with people on a civilian level, and working with the community is at the community emergency management level. But once your resources are exceeded outside that, then what happens is a state of emergency gets declared, right? And so people think that FEMA is just supposed to bring in the truckloads with food and water and all that stuff. Oftentimes that stuff is being donated or brought in from, donations and contributors outside of the community. So local communities, local businesses, things of that nature. And so this idea that we're just going to get rescued by FEMA is a false belief. And if you don't believe me, just look at history. Look at Hurricane Katrina, look at Western North Carolina, look at all these places. And this isn't FEMA's fault per se. I think there's a lot wrong with how FEMA is portrayed, both their own image, like as this agency that can, take care of all the emergencies, but more importantly, what they actually do. And they're a management agency. They're there to direct traffic and resources as effectively as possible during a emergency. And oftentimes they don't do a great job of it because they don't understand the area and the things down there. But more importantly, they're also teach, right? They have a huge component in teaching emergency managers from the local and state levels how to run those operations so that they don't have to be called in when certain things happen. We've just become way too reliant on the federal government to bail us out of every single situation and disaster that we expect something now. And that's the worst place that you could possibly be at is if you're expecting help. You should always be able to self-rescue.
No, it's the government's job to provide me for everything that I need. Yeah, I have no responsibility here to protect myself. I don't know what you're talking about. Um,
Right.
so let me ask you this. Do you think any of Elon's Doge cuts are going to affect FEMA? I mean, do you think that there's a measurable amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that's happening within FEMA? Are a lot of those resources that people, like, say, water that was donated to Flint, I saw, right? Like, it never actually got delivered to the people that needed water there. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just something I heard. But do you think that Doge is going to have an impact on FEMA's funding? And do you think that Doge is going to find a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse through FEMA?
Yes, I think there's a time. I think everywhere in our government there's a huge amount of fraud, waste, and abuse, and I can say that because I've worked in almost every layer. A lot of the funds, a lot of the money, a lot of the contracts, they're done in such a way to set people up and organizations up, and guys at these upper rungs of these executive levels within these organizations are negotiating these contracts, very similar to the military defense industry, where you have generals who pick a gun, for example, to be the next fighting rifle of a particular branch or whatever. And then all of a sudden, when they retire, they got a board seat at whatever company that was, right? And I think FEMA, in a lot of ways, is set up in the same way. And what people don't realize is any organization itself isn't necessarily bad. It's the people that make up the organization, particularly the leadership, as we're seeing now, that are the big determining factors on the efficiency and efficacy of that organization. And FEMA is one of those things where they made it look like, hey, this is this beautiful idea that we have this organization that can just step in whenever it needs to be and rush in and save the day. But when we look at the history, a lot of this has been optics, and a lot of that money goes to those optics. They go to the promotional materials, the stuff, the training, which is all great. But FEMA itself, I think there's a huge amount of time, money, and effort being wasted in areas where it can be effectively put in helping the American people, and it's not.
Yeah. Is there a point where FEMA says, yeah, we can't help? Like, is there a point where FEMA backs out? I mean, I would guess that maybe Western North Carolina would have been their tipping point, but maybe not.
I don't think they can actually, once a state of emergency is declared, I don't think they can actually do that. But as we've seen in Western North Carolina, where you walk into a FEMA center and there's, they'll have this giant building rented out, or they'll have, one of those portable, single wides out there, and you go in there and it's literally one guy sitting at a desk, computer screen open, they're on their phone.
Yeah.
Like they're not
communities
giving up, but they're not really trying either in some cases. And that's just how it is a lot of times.
can communities deny FEMA, like if they're becoming more of a problem than a benefit?
Yeah,
Can communities be like, hey, never mind, get out of here?
they can. The problem is that your local government doesn't want to do that because they're looking to get money on the back end for recovery. FEMA, when they get down to a site, what they're doing is they're doing assessments. There's a pool of money sitting in the sidelines for natural disasters due to presidential declarations or whatever. And if you have X amount of damage to your area, that money will then become available to you. FEMA then goes down there and they do what they call window surveys, where they go through, they have certain criteria, a very simple checklist of things, right? Was there water level apparent on the house above 18 inches to determine that it was absolutely flooded? Check. Was there significant damage to the structure to where the house may not be repairable? Check. All these things are part of this criteria. And then once they gather up, they can do a full damage assessment. And then those funds that FEMA has on the sidelines, that county will then have those funds to disperse as needed. Now, the thing that people need to realize is they are not first on the list when it comes to disbursement of these disaster funds. They're probably at the bottom of the list because critical infrastructure is always going to come first. Power, water, anything that is a life-saving critical need, those are going to be the first that gets those funds. And then it's going to be the people who are in the most impacted areas that are slow and areas that are probably going to be the closest to major cities or major impact points that are going to get the disbursement next. And that's why you're seeing people in Western North Carolina where they're up in the hollers somewhere not getting any sort of even contact. And the reason being is you may, like I said earlier, you may only have 3 representatives from FEMA on the ground. They may be the only ones trained in that area to do these window surveys. And now you have an impacted area with, let's say, 500,000 people. They're going to stick to the densest areas because that's where they can do the most surveys in one given day. And as they spiral out and start to get more and more and build that up, maybe they'll start to get out to the hollers. But in that moment, they're working with the people who are closest to where they work because that's where they can get the most information in the shortest amount of time with the limited resources and personnel that they have. So we're dealing with a system that is inherently flawed, especially if you're living away from the most impacted urbanized areas.
So earlier you talked about, I don't think you used the term, but like wargaming, but how do counties and FEMA and how do these groups come together to try and either prevent or stack up resources and plan for potential upcoming events? Say there's we know that there's a high risk of a natural disaster happening in a given area. What does that quote unquote wargaming aspect look like before the disaster hits with regard to these communities and the government involvement?
Yeah, so this is something anyone can do, and this is something I tell people all the time. If you want to know what kind of plans your county or your it's going to be your county, and then your individual townships will also have emergency operation plans. They're called EOPs. So if you put in your town name, the state, and EOP, you're going to get, hopefully they'll have publicly available emergency operations plan, which is going to give you the 30,000-foot public-facing view of what your town intends to do for the major hazards that it's listed. And they get that information from the county, state, and the federal level based off of census data and all this other data that they collect through the various other organizations out there who are tracking it. Your water resource agencies, your GIS, spatial mapping guys, and your census data and all that stuff. But realistically, the number one plan you want to look at so that you can start having a baseline to understand what you should be preparing for is called your county hazard mitigation plan. So if you take your county name and you put in hazard mitigation plan, your county has spent your tax dollars to build a plan that shows you all the threats, hazards, and possible dangers that are in that area. It's also going to tell you the critical facilities. It's going to tell you, things that people don't often think about as major problems, such as pipelines, railways that are transporting, chemicals or stuff that might cause hazardous material spills. Airports and airlines specifically, as we're seeing now, this is something that I've been tracking with recent trends all around the world. Planes are seemingly falling out of the sky. Nuclear power plants, water treatment facilities, any sort of chemical manufacturing, all these things, if they're in your area, might possess a threat to you, and those should be in your hazard mitigation plan. And based off the location of these facilities and these lines of transport for these various things that are necessary, if you don't understand your proximity and relationship to them, then you are setting yourself up for a potential disaster. Because if you're near a pipeline and something happens to that pipeline and you're in the plume of that area, guess what? You need to now realize that there's a very short amount of time in which you can put stuff in your vehicle and evacuate, and you may not come back depending on what was actually released, what's going on. And so knowing those threats in your backyard, I think, is way more important than worrying about what Russia's doing or what China's doing or what the cartels are doing, unless those cartels, like in your example in Texas or along the border in New Mexico, Arizona, California, those might possess a legitimate threat. And if that's the case, and you know the case, and it's not represented inside your county mitigation plan as something that people should be concerned about, well, then it's your job as a citizen to bring it to the awareness of both other people around you, but to your county itself as something that needs to be put in there. And that's something that we all get a say in terms of how the information that goes into these types of plans that we use to plan our lives around as well.
Earlier, we had talked about the fact that you had nuclear plants inside of your AO as a part of some of the stuff that you mitigate against from a hazard perspective. If in your area, as an example, if there's a massive chemical spill, how long do people actually have to get out before it's too late?
So it depends on what the chemical is. It depends on how much the wind's blowing. There's so many factors that go into that. So you need to know wind patterns first off, right? And what that has to do with, it has to do with plume dispersion and how the level of drift in which that plume is being carried. Now, the further a chemical or even something like radiological, nuclear, the further it drifts, the more it disperses, the less potency or the less damage it may cause. But you need to know what those chemicals are and the level in which it will be affected based on the container, the facility, all those things. There's actually a book up here. It's called the Emergency Response Guidebook that's given to guys like me, hazmat responders, and people who work in chemical facilities, OSHA guys, stuff like that, that has every single major manufactured chemical out there. And you can get these on eBay. You just got to look for them. And then there's also an app on your phone put out by NIOSH. It's the NIOSH Pocket Guide. And you can drive on, go outside any of these facilities, and they legally have to have the containers marked outside of these chemicals and what they're actually transporting. And you can look and compare within these guides what, just how volatile these things are, what the risks are, what the symptomology is. These are all things that if these are in your area of operation, you need to know, because if a train derailment happens and they're burning off vinyl chloride, you need to know if you have a prolonged exposure to that you may have irreversible lung and eye damage that may be dealing with for the rest of your life. But the only way to know that is to educate yourself, and that starts with that hazard mitigation plan, getting guides like these, or downloading the free app. And I don't work for these guys. If there's free information, I want people to have it. But that NIOSH CDC Pocket Guide has everything in there, from how to identify it, what it looks like, the dispersion rate, and the medical care that you need should you be exposed to something like vinyl chloride or ammonia or things of that nature. So a lot of this, it would be easy for me to say you got X amount of time, but there's so many factors that us as individuals, we have to figure out, that if I just give a blanket answer, my blanket answer is expect if something big happens near you that involves chemicals, if you're not out of the house and out of that area moving perpendicularly to whatever the wind of that event coming towards you is, within 10 minutes, you're waiting too long. Because
Yeah.
you can always leave and come back. But if you stay and that chemical is volatile, you could be death. It could be serious damage. And we've seen that now, whether it was the biolab spill down in Georgia with the chemical supply, the pool chemical supplies. So dealing with ammonia and some of those things and chlorine, or we go up to Palestine, Ohio, where we saw the vinyl chloride and then burning it off, which actually in some cases made it worse for at least the people who are, living there and eventually had to evacuate.
Can a gas mask actually protect people from some of these threats? I mean, is it just a
Absolutely.
stopgap? I mean, I feel like gas masks entered in the conversation relatively recently, and I don't feel like enough people really consider the reality of these threats. I mean, how many of these threats happen, throughout a given, let's say, a year, and would a gas mask actually protect folks from those real chemical threats?
So let me ask you a question. I'm going to flip it real quick before I answer that. I'm going to say, how long do you need air to live?
Indefinitely.
Pretty much, right? After about a minute, most people start struggling, but 3 minutes and no air is when we start. Most people, unless you're, Wim Hof or something, is when brain damage starts occurring, right? And what people don't realize is the gas masks that are being made now, particularly with your sponsor, good friends of mine, Avon, they are the best gas masks in the world, and I don't say that lightly. Look at who they work with. Every special operations, every top tier unit, anyone in that realm that might be dealing with a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear event chooses pretty much to go with Avon because of the spectrum that their filters can filter out of from a variety of both industrial based chemicals, but also to some of these threats that are becoming a very real possibility, right? The dirty bombs, the biological or chemical weapons that, people are realizing maybe more and more a reality that may be faced in the future now. And so those gas masks, always go by the rating, always make sure, but they give you the expansive time frame to leave an area to get to fresh air. And that's really what they are. They're an air tank. And most people, if you are near a major chemical facility, nuclear power plant, MSR that transports chemicals every single day, that gas mask might be the thing to get you out of that area so that you survive. Because your home air filter, for some of this stuff won't work. For some of it, it will. Simply changing to a MERV 13 is going to help filter so many particulates out of the air that's going to just make you live a better life when you're stuck inside your box, right? But most people don't even bother changing out their air filters yearly. And when they do, they buy the cheapest one from Target or Home Depot that they can. But there's a lot of things, gas masks, I think, are a huge investment. And I think people should at least consider it if they live in an area where there is a threat of a chemical spill or nuclear or biological.
Or even in Los Angeles, most recently, like all those fires end up burning up tires and gasoline and lithium batteries that are in Teslas and all kinds of other things. So we end up getting a whole
Just
lot
think about
more
what
issues.
what houses are made of now, what furniture is made of now. There's so many toxic
Petroleum.
fumes, and it's all petroleum based products. They're sealed with petroleum based products, and you're going to be breathing that in. So it's not like people think it's not going to protect you from it's like it's not just smoke when you're dealing especially with urban fires. There's so many toxic materials that we don't think about that if it starts to burn, you're going to breathe in, could cause serious damage. That's why a fire escape hood is such a valuable thing to have in your home. It's why, firefighters have the gear that they do. And a lot of times they're on closed loops when they bring in the tanks because they don't want to breathe in some of that toxic air when they're going into buildings. So air is so important. And it's one of those things that's not nearly talked about enough when it comes to preparations, is how we're taking care of keeping our air clean.
Yeah. We could probably go on and on about water and food and all of these sorts of things, but what is something that you think Like, how long should someone realistically, I guess we could go on down the list of water and food and all of these different things, but I want to ask one pointed question on the subject, which is how long should people realistically be prepared to go without a resupply from FEMA or these other organizations that come in and offer resupplies?
Listen, FEMA says 2 weeks. I challenge anyone to call down to people down in Western North Carolina and see if 2 weeks was enough. It's not, right? If you look at any of the literature that FEMA puts out, and this is why, some of these things FEMA wants, I won't say they want, but the government only wants you to be as self-reliant as you need to be without losing your reliance on the government, right? Because the sovereign man doesn't need to be controlled by the state. There's a little history lesson in there for a lot of you out there, but 90 days is what I tell people. And it's not that 90 days you're expecting for this certain thing to last 90 days. It's that when the 30 days, like we look at Katrina or North Carolina, the 30 days that something lasts, you now have a 60-day time gap where you have resources available to either rebuffer that original 30 days, get those resources back to create that what I like to call is essentially a survival timeline, right? Get that survival timeline back or figure out your next plans moving forward, right? And so we look at Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, we look at Western North Carolina, we look at Lahaina. That 90 days is giving you time to live in order to figure out what your next steps are, collect information, start seeing what's going on in the community, and then also enough of a buffer that if you have to help friends and families and neighbors, you have the ability to do so. Because yeah, we're not stocking for our neighbors, but we are. Because if my neighbor has no food and I have, let's say, 60 days worth of food, I'm going to help them. Is that responsible? Yes, it is. Because if I help them and then something happens, they're going to help me. And it doesn't hurt me. It might cost me what? A couple $100 to hook them up with a week or 2 weeks worth of food for his family. But the amount of rapport and relationship building that's going to solidify for not just that neighbor, but for other neighbors around. And so it's all about being that guy. If that's what the capable man is, right? It's being that guy that people turn to when they need help with stuff. And most people are like, well, why should I do that? Because it's the right thing to do, guys. Like, that's what community is all about, doing the right thing. And if you don't have the resources now, that's fine. Not everybody has the resources to do this. I'm not resource rich, but I've developed my life around the idea that I am going to have to help people. So when it comes to food and water and all that stuff, I've already built in my own personal systems to help myself and to help the people around me. But it takes a conscious mind. It takes people actually wanting to do that, to build the systems. And it doesn't take as many resources as you think about. It comes down to being thrifty. It comes down to saving and not spending your money on $3,000 scopes and IR designators that you'll never use in real life, stuff like that. When you stop, making clones of Green Beret and Rangers and Delta Forces rifles, you'll find you'll have a lot of money left over for preparing for yourself and for the people you care about. And I get made fun of because I'll bring out my training rifle to like some events where a bunch of guys are out there with all their nice gear and stuff. They're like, "Oh, dude, that's circa 2009." And I'm like, "Still shoots." Like,
Yeah.
Listen, the rifle may look like the GWAT special from 2006, but when we go down range and we look at the target, I'm not seeing a difference. So you tell me who the fool is at the end of the day, because I don't have the newest stuff, but I got a basement with a bunch of food and a bunch of water and a bunch of stuff to help my neighbors, and I feel pretty darn good about that.
Yeah. Folks, we're going to go to a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
When it comes to radio communication, your antenna is everything. And that's why ZBM2 Industries is the only antennas that we use on all of our radios here at Grid Base. They make the finest quality antennas that money can buy. Each antenna is handcrafted in San Diego, California, using top-tier materials, tested and sourced right here inside the United States. They've got everything from rugged vehicle-mounted antennas to high-performance handheld antennas. Whatever you're looking for, ZBM2 has got you covered. So, no matter where you are, you can upgrade your signal today and save 10% using the code GRIDBASE10 at checkout. Again, that's zbm2industries.com. Use the code GRIDBASE10 for 10% off at checkout.
All right, we are back. We were just talking about the importance of having enough food and storage, not only to sustain yourself for 90 days, but also to potentially, help out your neighbor. What a radical concept that would be.
Yeah, right.
I see that as not only we don't just give to gain, right? I mean, there's a reason to be.
No.
And of course, we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anybody else. So I think those kinds of things go without saying. But with regard to those things, I think it also could potentially stave off a lot of if everyone thought that way, it could stave off a lot of the negative things that we see happen when the community isn't taking care of each other, and then you get looting and you get all those sorts of other things. And unfortunately, that's usually when martial law is called into effect, is whenever the community can't police themselves.
Exactly.
Then the government steps in to quote unquote help out. I'm from the government. I'm here to help.
The worst words ever quoted, right? Ronald Reagan was his famous quote.
Yeah. So, it's on the topic of martial law. What is the biggest misconception? It seems like, well, let me back up a little bit. It seems like when any event happens, and I've been guilty of this in the past too, that like everyone's really quick to jump to like, oh, martial law's coming, and it's like this whole thing. It's kind of like what you said earlier about like the second lockdowns happen, it's all game over, and that's what they're jumping to and looking for in those kinds of situations, not looking for optimistically, but just looking out for as a potential threat. At what point does a government consider declaring martial law? Is it as big of a concern as it's usually made out to be? What are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about martial law and disaster response?
So typically with martial law, the only time martial law is going to be declared is when the local government can no longer control what's going on a criminal level, right? The looting, the rioting, the damage to the general public and public infrastructure is outside their normal control. And typically when that happens, then the governor, or in some cases a president or a general during wartime, can declare martial law. And all that's really saying is they're going to bring in the military to then enforce the laws that the local law enforcement cannot handle, right? And that's what martial law is in a nutshell. Now, we have seen martial law be abused throughout history, but it's very hard to do that in modern United States up until this point in history. I don't know what the future holds. It's going to be very interesting. But just in my experience in Philadelphia, when they brought in the National Guard to sit on corners, stuff like that. And I've been a part of instances like this where, we've been on standby with riot gear and stuff like that to go and help out should it happen, and got trained in that stuff. But most of those guys, if you go out there and you look at them, they don't have magazines. And if they do have magazines, and magazines, I mean ammo magazines, right? If they do have ammo magazines, they're empty because no one's trusting a 19-year-old National Guard infantry bubba who got 3 months of time in infantry school to have live ammunition unless they're actively being shot at. They're not going to escalate to that level until people are actually trying to fight the military within that area. So when you saw these guys out in the corners in Philly, like oftentimes they didn't even have bullets. They were just there in their armored vehicles pretending. The recent coup in South Korea is a great example of that. I don't know if you got to see that footage, but you had South Korean special operators out there. But if people noticed, they had blue guns, which were simunition. So you had a bunch of guys who were, the president was basically trying to prevent their Congress from voting him out of office. And so he sent in all these special operators, but they didn't even have real bullets or real guns. They were using simunition. And so the parliament just walked right past them. People just walked right past them, and they really couldn't do anything about it. So I think people like to make martial law as this thing, and it can turn into something much bigger than what it has been in the past. And I think maybe depending on how things go with, the cartel business or some of these other bad actors, who knows what may happen down the line. But when we look at it in American history, at least recent American history, we have never seen martial law really take the shape and face that most people are worried about in terms of, the threats. The thing that I worried about in Philly was being stuck in an area that I couldn't escape from and it being bottled up inside with the bad actors.
Yeah. Well, we'll all have to hold off on our martial law canary in the coal mining then.
And here's the thing, right? I think that people, if you're worried about martial law, you should really be worried more about your privacy and personal security than martial law. If martial law is a serious concern for you, you should really take the time to realize how much your privacy is violated on a day-to-day basis and start focusing how we change legislation on that before you start worrying about martial law. Because the thing is I don't need to put, Private Smuckatelli on a corner to make a statement as to who's in charge. I just need to make people disappear, right? From a governmental standpoint. So if all of a sudden your neighbor is super vocal about the government and things that they're doing and all that stuff, and then the next day, Jim Bob's gone and no one knows where he's gone, that's a much bigger concern for me in the world that we operate now than a private on the corner with a 15-year-old AR-15 and no magazines with ammunition. And that's where people need to change their mindset in terms of what real authority and totalitarianism looks like versus what we've been spoon-fed through media and through our perception of what totalitarianism is. And we'll realize that there's a lot of stuff out there that, we don't realize what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I could ask you a million more questions, but I think what I want to do now is kind of recap some of this stuff, right? Your food and water supply should be 90 days. Give me a second for a cough.
Go for it. Can I throw out some quick numbers that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, stand by. I'm gonna lead you into that question.
Okay.
We could probably talk. I could ask you a million more questions. You're such a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate you coming on to discuss all of these sorts of things. But in the interest of being respectful of the listeners and your time, I kind of want to start to recap it. But I want to give you the floor real quick. And do you have any basic numbers that you can shoot out to people for maybe food and water supplies or all these sorts of things? Like if someone's writing down and taking notes, this is the part where you pull your pen out and start jotting down some of the high level stuff. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
And this is for physical needs of a human body that you need to be thinking about when you're preparing for whatever scenario. Regardless of what the scenario is, these are the things the human body needs in order to stay alive. Okay. And some of these things most guys aren't really talking about, but if we just break it down to simple biology and what goes in, we need food. For men, it's 2,800 calories. For women, it's 2,400 calories. These are just numbers that, that are out there that make sense. But most Americans are eating a surplus of 3,000 calories plus. So if you try to cut down your calories, 500 calories or more, it's going to have an effect on your body. The second thing is water. That's 1 gallon per day. You're going to need that. That's just for cooking and drinking is that 1 gallon. That doesn't include cleaning. That doesn't include some of these other things we need water for. The third thing is sleep. You need sleep. People do not realize that once your cognitive function starts to fail, you're going to get injured or something's going to happen and everything else is just going to start to fall apart. So having a rest plan, knowing who is going to be up taking care of stuff when you go down is extremely important, especially if you're that guy in your group, your family, whatever the case may be. So having a proper rest plan is going to be essential to surviving and making sure that you're doing okay. The fourth thing is body temperature. When the human body gets taken outside of its baseline temperature, 1.5 degrees or more, all of a sudden we start seeing things fail. So figuring out how to keep your body temperature within that range is super important. So you look down and you're like, this doesn't necessarily mean it has to be in a house. There's people living in South America who sleep in hammocks all day or night. But maintaining body temperature is so important. So if you're going to focus on 4 things to start off with, that food, that water, the body temperature, and the sleep are the main things that you need to think about to keep you healthy in an emergency. Now, a couple of those things can fail for a little bit, but if you don't steer them back on track, you're going to start seeing a level of wear and tear on your mind and your body, along with the stress of the situation that's just going to lead you down a road for disaster on top of what you're dealing with. So maintaining those and then thinking about your air, like we talked about earlier, I'm not going to beat that dead horse, but those 4 big things are what's so important to staying alive in emergency situations. All the other stuff is supplementary to maintaining that body balance in terms of the water, the food, the rest, and the stuff that goes and the temperature.
Yeah, that's super useful stuff to know. And folks, if you want to know more super useful stuff, please go check out Chris, the emergency expert, on social media. Chris, where can people find you? I mean, I know you're on Instagram. Do you have stuff coming in the future that people can look forward to? Do you have a book in the works? Tell us about what we can expect from Chris in the future.
There's going to be a book in the works. I'm already kind of have it drafted out because I have a different approach I want to take to some of these other books that are out here in terms of just getting people the mindset, because that's a big part of it. It's a lifestyle change if you want to be about this life. But I got, stay tuned. My YouTube channel's coming out. I'm going to be talking long form on this coming up here. Getpreparedtogether.com is going to be the website. Once that's all up and running, that's where you're going to have everything to interact with me personally. So the YouTube links, IG, guides, videos, all those things are going to be available there. And for you to get to know me a little bit better, interact with me. So Get Prepared Together will be kind of like the hub for getting out to all these other things. And then the YouTube breakout is coming here real soon. I have like probably 50 plus hours of footage that I've been putting together over the past 3 years. Not all of it's good footage. A lot of it's bad footage, but I'm going to be putting together some really basic things to start off with. And then we'll start diving into some of these other realms, talking about working through mindset, how to increase your skill sets, your capability, and just being a good man and a more capable man or woman, because this isn't exclusively man stuff. This is for everyone, women, kids, whoever. How to be a more capable human being, because I think that as we see the world changing, there's so many people who are waking up to that particular thing and want to learn these skills and are being drawn to just, connecting to preparedness, but more importantly, self-sufficiency.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I know a lot of people are going to re-listen to this episode multiple times to try and extract all the nuggets of knowledge that they can from it, but we're looking forward to your book coming out. It will certainly go on our shelf here at GridBase. Folks, you can learn more about Chris by going to the Emergency Expert on social media and watching all the different wonderful information that he puts out. Chris has been a friend of GridBase for, I think, 2 years now at this point, and so much so that I was just more interested in getting to sit down and talk to Chris, because we always kind of have these 15-20 minute conversations, and getting to sit down with Chris for an hour and a half has been tremendous, and we're really appreciative of his time. You can go and listen to more episodes either on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. But if you want the first look, the exclusive look, the unedited take, you can go ahead and do that at patreon.com/gridbase. The Patreon and your support over there is how we're able to keep the studio up and running, bring on these guests, and so we would really appreciate it if you go over to the Patreon and check us out. Of course, we sell products. So we have a book that's coming out our own self. It's all about communications, which is something that Chris and I didn't get a chance to talk about. But, communications is critical, and keeping information lines open during natural disasters is just as important as anything else. And we certainly talk about a lot of that over there on our social media at gridbase.net, DOTNET. 300 videos last year. Of course, we have YouTube videos coming out all the time, so please go over there and check those out. But I'm your host, Jake, with GridBase, and we will see you on the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.